So without further ado, I would love to introduce the two speakers for this. First of all is Mr. Dom Monkhouse, who I'm lucky enough to call Dom my coach and mentor. He's an empowering and straight-talking entrepreneur, managing director and public speaker, and having scaled at pace 2 businesses out of the last 2 recessions, Dom is now pretty well placed to advise on how to actually help our organizations grow. Indeed, he credits the success of these businesses down to their distinctive approach, putting their people first, and great people make great companies, which seems incredibly relevant after obviously the talk that we've just had from Tom. The other person I would love to introduce is the awesome Trevor, who is a longtime colleague and quite frankly, one of the most inspiring people I have the pleasure to know. Trevor is a Facebook veteran, having first joined the business back in 2008 as an international head of strategy and planning. He became director of global agency development in 2011 before moving to Instagram in June 2019 as a mere director of marketing ops. Trevor joined TikTok, though, at the beginning of 2020, and we're very lucky to call them our clients. And he is the head of marketing global business solutions for Europe and will share with us their journey today. So Dom and Trevor, welcome to the session. Tom, do I need Tom to stop sharing his screen, or is that okay?
No, he's not sharing.
No, we're fine. Great. Okay, brilliant. So Dom and Trevor, you've both experienced unprecedented growth in the organizations that you've worked in against a backdrop of what can only be described as global crises, obviously at different times. I would love each of you to tell me a little bit more about that, if that's okay, a little bit more about your experiences and what was most crucial to your growth in those times. Dom, would you mind if I hand it over to you first of all?
Yeah, sure. That's fine. Thank you, Kate. I think it's about the businesses that I built were service companies, and so they were absolutely predicated on great people. I think that it's impossible for customers to love your company if your people don't first. And so we went into the market, and recessions are a great time to attract amazing talent. Like if there's ever a time to be looking to attract great people, it's when other people aren't hiring. So I think that was absolutely fundamental, getting great people and then get really clear on what we expected from them.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Trevor, over to you. What would you say with TikTok at the moment? You know, what's most important for you and crucial to your growth through everything that's been happening?
Yeah, I think to start out, the COVID backdrop is not the thing that was making it a difficult task or the key challenge for us. We were at the beginning of this year, we were a business where the platform was bigger than the actual business itself. So that's my task. The task of the people that are around me was to build a business that was growing exceptionally fast and grow it exceptionally quickly. And that means recruiting lots of people in a very short space of time. And developing a culture that is our own and unique, and just getting people into the business to do that. Then COVID came along, and then it did one of two things. One, COVID has accelerated the platform, but it's also, if you're trying to build a business exceptionally quickly, there's nothing more efficient and effective than being able to sit on Zoom all day interviewing people. Which is great, you can do that. The challenge now is that doesn't breed culture, and we'll come back to it in a minute. But the stuff that Tom was talking about highly resonates with me, because the working from home isn't just working from Zoom. There is a cultural thing that has to exist. There's a cultural thing that we haven't got right, that I think companies need to acknowledge or understand, that when you are working from home, working remotely, you don't just give people a laptop and an internet connection and then that works. We are human, we are people. And there are things such as social connectivity and serendipity and spontaneity and all of those things that need to exist in order to build a culture. And that's something that we're focusing on at this moment in time. So growing exceptionally quickly in terms of people has been the challenge, and the COVID thing has been both a blessing and a curse.
Well, I mean, that's I can really understand that, you know, and when so many of your people haven't met each other, I mean, that's a huge thing, isn't it? Dom, in your opinion, you know, and having had the experiences that you did at Rackspace and obviously Pier 1, you know, and I know from the conversations that you and I have that culture you think is so important for strategy, in particular in times of crisis and change. You know, how do you do that? You know, what's really important?
Well, I think you know, Peter Drucker said culture eats strategy for breakfast, but that means you've actually got to have a plan, right? And then your culture should be in service of your strategy. And so it's entirely possible for some private equity backed businesses not to care about their people, and they've got a plan to drive revenue and then flip the business. I've worked in some of those businesses. I've no desire to work with them again. To me, it's about building something sustainable. That you know, I think the you know, you're trying to get some differentiation. You're trying to get people in a time of crisis. It's unsettling, and so there's an opportunity for people to think about their business relationships differently. So what we found is that you would think that people would sort of batten down the hatches and would keep with the suppliers they've got, but actually a crisis often says to people, should we look at our cash flow? Should we look at our supplier base? And so then they're looking at the marketplace, and we were able to say, look, we've got this amazing service offering. And so if our service offering was what was going to drive our revenue in the next 3 to 5 years, then what underpins that? And for us, underpinning that in Rackspace's case, our statement, we were going to deliver fanatical support. That meant that every interaction you had with our business had to hit that high bar. And the only way to do that was with culture. You can't write a rule book and compel people to be amazing at customer service. You have to say, okay, well, what if that's our purpose? What type of people would we want to hire? And then culture is what they do when you're not looking. So how would we take those people that have the right sort of service DNA? And for us, actually, that was often people who didn't come from IT. It was actually people who'd spent time in hospitality, who'd spent time in other service businesses, and saying, okay, here's what we need you to do. But that they had the DNA to make the right decision. Because frankly, if you've worked in a bar for 3 years, or you've worked in a restaurant for any length of time, you can't do that unless you enjoy doing it. You know, you get another job. And so you take some of those people, and some of the best employees we had, you know, I'd be in a restaurant having dinner, and I'd say to the person who's serving us, why are you working here? You know, like, wouldn't you? And I hired one of our best salespeople I hired because she was serving me dinner in a restaurant.
Wow.
And I offered her a job, and she was fantastic. And she did a tour of duty with us. She did about, you know, we were the plumbers of the internet, right? So we didn't do anything interesting ourselves. The way we did it was interesting, but we built sheds and filled them with servers. And so she came and did a tour of duty with us, you know, that again, so there's an expectation that people come and spend some time with us to develop themselves and their careers, that it's not a job for life. And so there's going to be some turnover, but whilst people are with us, it's an exciting time to do what they love doing.
Yeah, I really get that, right? And I think what I really get from what you're saying there is that actually culture and strategy are intrinsically linked, or indeed they absolutely need to be. And then bringing in the right people who genuinely, once you've got that clarity on what your strategy stands for and the culture that's going to embody it, it's about pulling in the right people who can deliver on that. And that might be from places that you don't necessarily think. I get that. I really get that. Talking about people, you know, like, I would love to know, Trevor in particular here, and we just touched on this, considering so many of your teams now are distributed and potentially haven't actually met. How has it been possible to create that culture, that sense of community within the TikTok team?
Yeah, so I would say that the 90% of my team have been recruited and onboarded virtually, and not all of them have met each other, which is a challenge, particularly as we're in a very fast growing, fast moving business. We're in the people business and the relationship business. We're in the creative business, which means that the human connection and serendipity needs to exist. The thing I've focused on very, very beginning, I think culture, strategy is easy and replicable. Culture is how you're going to be successful. If not, you've got the right culture to do that. And the thing that I've talked about at the very beginning, It's just where we are as a company is that we have to have a builder's mindset, right? And bear with me on this but I use this all the time.
You're talking about builders,
right?
And Don talked about plumbing.
Builders. And then there are three types of builders. There are the foundation diggers, there are the house builders, and there are the interior decorators. And all of those have different mindsets and different skills. And you need all of those in a business. But at this moment in time, the mindset we need is one of foundation diggers, right? So if you think about that, if you get people in that are thinking about, okay, we are a company that's growing exceptionally fast. There are conditions that exist, that haven't existed before. There are systems, tools, and processes that probably should be in place for companies of our size, but they're not because we're too early. It's how do you get people thinking like that? So coming together and wanting to help each other and doing everything they need in order to which is outside of their day job, to ensure that they are encouraging serendipity and support and all of the things that we know that we need to do in order to build those solid foundations. It's that mindset, and that's the mindset that's getting us through, right? Because we already had the challenge of a fast growing business. We already had the challenge of lots of social and economic pressure in terms of TikTok as a business. Then we had the COVID thing. So just having the mindset of builders and the mindset of foundation diggers is the thing that we've been really trying to get people to understand, because mindset, I think, is the thing that is getting us through this. Because if you come into the business, or if you come into this situation with the wrong mindset, you're not going to be able to cope, or you're not going to have the coping mechanisms that will get you through. So it's how can we get builders and people thinking about foundations, digging those foundations. And yes, we also have house builders, and we have some superb interior decorators, but at this moment in time, everyone's focused on the task of building those foundations and doing everything we need to do that, whether that be our strategy or our culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's so blooming true, isn't it? You know, and we've talked a lot about this. You know, we need people at the moment who've probably got quite a different set of, there's a bit within skills, but there's a lot within beliefs and behaviors, right? And I love how you put that about the mindset, you know, and having that growth mindset right now feels, you know, incredibly powerful, and actually something that is going to keep us in line with that kind of strategy that we've set for ourselves, in particular when there's such mixed messaging. How can I stay focused? How can I keep going in this period of growth? And it's
also really important, and I'm sorry, Kate, to talk over you, but it's also really important, because if you're disconnected from your colleagues, particularly if there's no colleagues, if they're colleagues you've not met before, you don't have this assumption of good intent that would exist if you're sat next to someone all day, every day, and you hear them. There's this disconnection. There's this. The word is not distrust, because you are trusting people, but you don't trust them to the extent that you would do if you knew them, if you were in the office together, if you had coffee together, if you had a beer or had a sandwich with them. Just those moments don't exist, right? And that is eating away at successful businesses and culture, because as Tom said, working from home and working remotely isn't just about being on Zoom. How do you replicate those things and encourage those things? And those are things that, you know, we're struggling with it at this moment in time, but we need to fix that, right? Because it's the only way that we're going to accelerate and continue to accelerate our growth, and it's the only way that people are going to feel that belonging and feel part of the process. And then for junior members of staff, it's the only way that they're going to get exposure to senior members and senior folks and learning new stuff. So it's a very, very challenging time. Whilst it's really good for growing and accelerating business and really efficient, actually it's a very challenging time if you just take it to the human relationship element of it, and we all need to work at that.
Yeah, and do you know what? Suddenly it struck me when you were saying that. Actually, I think what I'm taking from what you've just said actually is a real clarity that TikTok have kind of said, do you know what? This is different, and therefore we've got to act differently. And forgive me for that being a really obvious insight there. But the point being is that, you know, certainly I think some of the clients we've kind of spoken about, the clients we've, not even clients or organizations we've spoken with, you know, there's been almost like this waiting to return, and actually it ain't going to return, right? So this then now is, you know, if this is the reality, it's going to look actually very, very different.
It's resilience.
Who
and when
knew?
you
Who knew?
resilience.
Who knew?
And the other story is the people. And again, sorry, this is my last point.
No,
The people
have
that
as many as you want.
the prisoners of war in World War II weren't the ones that were thinking this will be over by the summer. It were the ones who were thinking, okay, this could go on for a while. How can we cope with the situation that we're in? It'll finish at some point, but they didn't have a focused date on it, because that you don't build resilience there. And this is sort of what we've been trying to do. Everyone thinks, yeah, we're going to go back to the office in, say, it was going to be the end of the summer and then by winter, but actually it's going to be next year and probably further, right? So how do you just build the resilience and the expectation, and build systems, tools, and processes that means that this could happen for a long period of time? And actually, when we go back, it's still not going to be normal. We're not going to be going back to the office five days a week. In fact, we'll probably be off going to the office 1 day a week, if that, and then you're going to have the optional choice to do that. So it's the resilience you need, and the mindset, which is really important. Sorry.
And that's actually that's very interesting, isn't it? Because I think at the moment there's an element in particular as we kind of go into this second phase, of actually feeling like, well, we've done a marathon and now we've got to do another sprint. Actually, the reality is it's going to be an ongoing marathon. So we've got to prepare ourselves for that. I'd love to know, actually, and I'd ask both of this, Trevor, I'm very clear, on some of the different things that are going on over at TikTok at the moment. But, were there any particular challenges that came up with either Rackspace or Pier 1, that maybe ones that weren't expected throughout that period? In particular, I suppose, when it came to people.
It's interesting. I was thinking about that and thinking about what Trevor was saying, and I think actually that one of the things is getting really clear on what you expect of people every day. So one of the things that we had to do as we got bigger, we realized that staff engagement starts to fall, right? And as a business scales up fast, that often happens, and it's been exacerbated, as Trevor's saying, by the fact that people aren't in the office. And in fact, in talking to some clients in the last week, I've seen the executive teams just start to look a bit weary. They've been doing 12 hours a day or 14 hours a day, and Microsoft's just introduced this virtual commute thing into Teams so that people can actually try and block out, that the day's gone up by 20%, but the productivity hasn't. And often you see that when you're scaling a company really quickly, your productivity per head starts to fall off, the engagement starts to drop. And then one of the things we've done in the past, and I think people need to do now, is to focus on what was the 1 or 2 or 3 things we absolutely have to do today. And you could spend all day on Zoom, and you could spend all day on email. But if you just do that, you get to the end of the day and you feel like, God, I'm exhausted, but I haven't achieved anything. I've done nothing of that was important. I've made no contribution to the team. I haven't advanced towards our purpose or our BHAG. And so trying to get the teams really clear on what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things you have to do today, and what's the score, so that people, hang up their headphones at 5 o'clock and they go, right, I've achieved something, as opposed to, God, tomorrow I've just got to get back on the treadmill and do it again. And that sort of that fatigue, the Stockdale paradox that you were talking about, this is, setting ourselves up to work like this in the long run is very different to thinking we're going to do this for 6 or 8 or 12 or whatever weeks, and then we're back to normal. And so that, I think that's overtaken people in the last few weeks, certainly the executive teams that I work with. They're like, oh God, we're just exhausted. What do we need to do? How do we need to reset so that if we're working like this through to Christmas and maybe through to Easter, that this is a positive, enjoyable experience for us and our teams?
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's I mean, we're coming back to that whole point that Dr. Hazel said earlier. It's controlling the controllables. What can we bring back into our control so we have that feeling of accomplishment? Because that is the thing that is going to really drive our energy, right? It's going to drive our purposeful energy. It's going to drive our emotional energy as well. Trevor, I'd love to ask you, have you, any particular tips from you in terms of stuff that you've done over at TikTok, either to create that culture or specifically, to help keep people going through these times?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a book, as Dom said, there's people are back to back all day, every day. It seems that the things that were happening in the office are multiplied, and then you open up your diet, your calendar, and from 8:30 till 6:30 is back to back. booking space for booking a couple of hours a day, or booking space to do a number of things. One is work, right? Two is time, lunch and time for yourself.
Yeah.
Three is time for the team. So I've gone from 6 people to nearly 60 people in a very short space of time, of which they don't know each other. So we have a daily hangout, which is just space just before lunch, where we can just come in and just tell people about our day. And the conversations can be constructive, or the conversations can just be about what you saw that day and what the postman said. Those things are really, really important, because they build into intimacy and relationships and that sort of stuff. So yeah, building in time to do those sorts of things. And we also just have, as I said, the mindset. We have what we call bite styles, which are some of the values that we have as a company, of which it's things like aim for the highest and be grounded and courageous, but it's also be open and humble, be candid and clear, always day one, which is probably the most valuable of all of them, just because when I was at Facebook, it was done. It was I forgot what it was when I was at Facebook. It was done is better than perfect, or move fast and break things. But here it's always day one. But it's just a coping mechanism that just allows you to have a thought process that, okay, things are moving very, very quickly and things can get on top of you. But if you reset on a daily basis, then in your mindset, then that's good. Dom talked about having a list of things to do, achieve, or in a day or a week, but that's great. But we have bi-monthly planning processes. So rather than biannual or even annual, every 2 months we have that, and that's a great way to focus on tasks, because you have 2 months to do stuff in terms of these runs. But yeah, booking time for yourself, time for breaks, but also time to get together with your team and just have those serendipitous moments has been really, really important, surrounded by values that you can articulate.
Yeah, I love that. And I do you know what, and actually this is from an article that Jochen wrote, where he was talking about, obviously one of the greatest things that has come out of this time is that obviously we've lost the commute. I think everyone agrees that losing that commute has been incredibly powerful. In fact, I think something like 45.5 million days have been saved already in commute time, which is just mind-blowing. But the problem is that obviously work is spreading, and coming back to your point around kind of blocking time, actually, how can we actually put those like a little commute time in order to make sure that we are boundarying ourselves more, because that's one of the most important things that we can do. And
people say they've lost the commute, probably people that haven't got kids. I mean, Jesus Christ, because I miss the commute, because it means, one, I can get out the house away from my kids and not do breakfast, and two, I can listen to podcasts on the bus on my own for an hour. That was superb time. But now I get up and Dottie's on my shoulder wanting breakfast. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ.
that lack of learning time is really, some people are finding that really stressful.
Absolutely,
that.
Yeah.
Really are.
I've not listened to a podcast in months, and I love podcasts. It's because I can no longer find the time. Whereas if I have to get myself up at 7 and tell everyone I'm goodbye and get on the bus and on the bus for an hour, it's great.
You need to somehow replicate that, Trevor. You need to get that 15 minutes out. Just walk around the block. Go for a run. You love running. Can't stop you running. Listen, I'd love to thank both of you for your time on that. Is there anything that you'd finally add, that your real learnings from all of this, from your learnings in lockdown, shall we say, in terms of kind of like the cultures that you've set up or how people are feeling, anything that really, really stands out to you? Dom, you first, maybe.
I think where the teams have got really clear again about their purpose, that has had a galvanizing impact. Sometimes those, they're in the office and they just assumed everybody knew, but those CEOs I work with, where they've gone back to purpose and core values and behaviors, and they've gone back to their teams and they've reiterated that and said, how can we make sure we replicated that? Where Trevor was saying, that sort of hangout time or whatever it might be. What is it that we did well in the office that we should be deliberate about? That's been very well received by those teams.
Yeah, and do you know what? Actually, there's something in and something that we're certainly talking to teams a lot about is, that purpose, or indeed that manifesto, or those behaviors or those values. how do we do them now? How do we live and breathe them now? What does it look like now? Trevor, over to you, over at TikTok. Anything in particular that kind of stands out as a learning?
Well, not as a learning, but I think we need to figure out what working from home really means. I mean, at this moment in time, great working from home practices, having a desk, having a seat, having a light ring, and being able to sit at home. I mean, I haven't accepted I'm working from home for a long period of time. I'm still sat on the sofa in my lounge, right? I haven't invested in a desk. I haven't got a chair. And at some point, I need that, right? But just understanding that is just the hygiene. What does actually great working from home mean? And I don't think anyone's figured that out yet. Which is why I really love Tom's discussion, because it's what I'm struggling with at this moment in time. And I just need to figure it out for everyone.
Okay. Awesome. Well, what an amazing morning. Thank you to all of our speakers. You know, what has become clear, I don't know about you guys, but is that there is a real opportunity, I think, that surrounds us. COVID has given us, the intelligent, forward-thinking companies, I believe, a thirst for knowledge and a desire for difference in our organization. And now is truly the time for that. And we've heard that from all of our speakers. Put simply, people in crisis do not perform well. So if we are facing greater threat, then very simply, we must also invest greater support. We need different sets of skills, behaviors, and beliefs to get to our best now. And let's be clear, whilst this is undoubtedly the right thing to do, it is also evidence, as we've seen this morning, that it's going to be the best thing to help our organisations grow out of crisis. And indeed, I believe that the gift that we've been given here is an appreciation more than anything over the last few months for the capacity of humans. And in this really uncertain world that we're now living in, we have to focus on the things that we can control. And I believe that actually an intention to make our people a strategic priority in our businesses is certainly something that we can all control.